Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in.
Happy Thursday, everybody. This week, the Chinese government came into the UN General Assembly with a plan to seek support from countries in Latin America, Asia, and Africa that would freeze battle lines in the Ukraine war. US-based Politico reports that the US is opposed to the China proposed deal, and Ukrainian officials are alarmed by it, so much so that they have circulated a document among diplomats gathered in New York. According to this document, in its proposal, China is trying to persuade diplomats to support peace talks focused on, quote, taking into account the security interests of each country, end quote, with the objective of, quote, preventing Russia from losing the war, end quote. Ukraine President Zelenskyy, in his speech at the UN General Assembly yesterday, Wednesday, took his most critical stance against China to date in response to the proposed peace plan, arguing that proposals that do not restore all of Ukrainian territory harken back to the era of colonialism and imperialism. The Beijing and Brasilia-backed proposal would call for an immediate pause in fighting and peace talks to elevate all potential peace plans. Quote, Ukrainians will never accept why anyone in this world believes that such a brutal colonial past, which suits no one today, can be imposed on Ukraine now instead of a normal, peaceful life. End quote. Adding, quote, if someone in the world seeks alternatives to any of these points or tries to ignore any of them, it likely means they themselves want to do a part of what Putin is doing. End quote. He also said his country's intelligence services report Russia is receiving images and detailed information on the infrastructure of the country's nuclear plants from a third country's satellites. While he did not name China in his speech as supplying the satellite information, he told ABC in an interview Tuesday that Russia utilizes Chinese satellite photographs of Ukraine's nuclear plants ahead of possible strikes. The US also warned earlier this year that China is providing Moscow with geospatial intelligence to support its war effort. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of Denmark blasted China this week for supporting Russia in its war against Ukraine and accused Beijing of not playing by international trade rules. In an interview with US-based Politico on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, the Danish Prime Minister said China was part of a group of 4 countries, including Russia, North Korea, and Iran, whose close cooperation, quote, has huge global consequences, end quote, adding, quote, I don't think it would be possible for Russia to have a full-scale war for more than 2.5 years now without help from China. We cannot continue a situation where China helps Russia in a war in Europe without consequences. They have to be held responsible for their activities, end quote. Meanwhile, in an exclusive report published yesterday, UK-based Reuters writes that Russia has established a weapons program in China to develop and produce long-range attack drones for use in the war against Ukraine, according to 2 sources from a European intelligence agency and documents reviewed by the outlet. Reuters alleges that IEMZ Kupol, a subsidiary of Russian state-owned weapons company Elmaz Ante, has developed and flight-tested a new drone model called Garpia 3, G3, in China with the help of local specialists. Quote, the White House National Security Council said it was deeply concerned by the Reuters report of the drones program, which it said appeared to be an instance of a Chinese company providing lethal assistance to a US-sanctioned Russian firm. End quote. Next up, this week on Tuesday, the PRC Ministry of Commerce announced an investigation into American clothing company PVH Group, owner of brands such as Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, Warner's, Olga, and True & Co. for, quote, allegedly violating normal market transaction principles regarding Xinjiang-related products, interrupting normal transactions with Chinese enterprises, other organizations or individuals, and taking discriminatory measures, end quote. As regular China Update viewers may recall, in response to Western laws designed to prevent companies from utilizing supply chains involved in forced labor in Xinjiang, China has quietly passed its own laws that ban compliance with those laws, sanctions or boycotts in other countries. The Commerce Ministry has a wide authority to deem commercial decisions as a threat to China's national security. The Ministry of Commerce said on Tuesday that it would allow PVH 30 days to provide documents regarding whether it has avoided buying from Xinjiang if PVH is found to have violated China's laws, the ministry said. The penalties could include a halt to the company's imports and exports from China, restrictions or bans on investments in China, restrictions or bans on PVH employees from working or entering China, and possibly fines on the company. In a special commentary published by state-run Global Times this week, the outlet hit out at growing international concern, including by the United Nations, about serious human rights issues in the western Chinese province, writing, quote, "In recent years, absurd anti-China narratives, such as genocide and forced labor in Xinjiang, have seriously disrupted the order of global textile and garment industries. Many well-known global apparel companies have been compelled to make the so-called politically correct choice regarding the issue of Xinjiang cotton. PVH states that China is an important growth engine for the company, with revenues increasing by more than 20% last year, and that it also wants to focus on increasing brand awareness in China. PVH ostensibly emphasizes the importance of the Chinese market, but what it is actually doing is cooperating with the US government's discriminatory suppression of Xinjiang-related products, which has seriously undermined the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese enterprises, as well as jeopardizing China's sovereignty, security, and development interests. PVH must provide a clear and unequivocal explanation. The Chinese side will not allow entities that slander and defame China to act with impunity in China, nor will it tolerate actions aimed at using the Xinjiang issue to contain China. Over the past 2 years, pressing multinational companies to withdraw from Xinjiang has been a common tactic employed by certain anti-China forces to discredit the nation and promote decoupling from China." End quote. Beijing appears to be looking to make an example of PVH, a warning to other multinational companies to pick a side. Killing a chicken to scare the monkeys, as the Chinese proverb goes. But of course, to use an English expression now, PVH is stuck between a rock and a hard place. Quote, "PVH is stuck because they cannot use Xinjiang cotton under US law without being able to conduct credible third-party investigations needed to prove no forced labor was used. But the PRC does not allow credible third-party investigations. So if PVH wants to be safe under US law, it cannot use Xinjiang cotton. But now the PRC is in effect saying, under PRC law, you have to use Xinjiang cotton." End quote. The fact that the PRC does not allow credible third-party investigations into forced labor accusations is, in of itself, very telling. Next up, we have 2 more updates to cover, but just quickly, if you are getting some value from today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button if you'd like to see the channel grow and be shown to new people. Liking, sharing, and subscribing are a tremendous help. The channel is almost at 76,000 subscribers. It would be great if we could reach that this week. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description for those who want to help me keep the channel sustainable, keep the channel going, have free open episodes for all 6 days a week. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, the FBI in the United States is investigating whether Hone Capital, H-O-N-E Capital, a venture capital firm based in California, accessed sensitive information about the technology, finances, or clients of startups to benefit its Beijing-based parent company or Chinese authorities. Hone Capital, founded in 2015 with $115 million in Chinese funding, invested in 360 US startups within 3 years, including stakes in companies like Stripe and Boom. The probe stems from concerns that some of these startups work with the US government, and some of Hone's funds may have come from Chinese government sources. UK-based The Financial Times reports that the FBI has interviewed people connected to Hone Capital and some startups it invested in to assess whether trade secrets or intellectual property may have been passed to China. Despite these concerns, Hone has been gradually divesting its holdings since 2019, with some stakes transferred to other US entities controlled by its Chinese parent. The investigation has also implicated AngelList, a prominent investment platform that received an $80 million investment from Hone, giving it access to numerous deals. Hohn's funds originated from China Science and Merchants Investment Management Group, a private equity group in Beijing, which transferred $215 million to its US entities between 2015 and 2018. Concerns were raised that CESC may have had access to Hohn's US servers, potentially exposing startup data. Meanwhile, Hohn has been embroiled in legal disputes with two former executives, Veronica Wu and Purvi Gandhi, since 2020, both of whom deny allegations of fraud and claim the company's Chinese owners incentivized investments in key technologies. CESC and Hohn have denied accusations of misappropriating trade secrets, dismissing them as baseless and driven by anti-Chinese sentiment. Now, this story brings us nicely to the final story for today. Craig Allen, president of the US-China Business Council, recently gave a long speech at the 2024 SCCEI China Conference on China's economic prospects, focused on the competition for technology leadership between the US and China. The speech contains many thoughtful observations worth noting. To end today, we will examine some of these points from the address. Our examination will be long, but the full speech is much longer, and it is useful to give Allen the space to unpack his ideas. We now quote selected excerpts from the speech directly. Thank you for allowing me to speak on a personal basis. These views are my own, not reflecting the positions of the US-China Business Council. A short while ago, I had an opportunity to talk to the governor of one of China's poorest agricultural provinces. I asked him about his top economic priorities. He quickly replied that semiconductors, software, biotechnology, robotics, aerospace, batteries, and new energy vehicles were his key priorities, neatly reciting all the key industries under the Made in China 2025 plan. I would have thought that addressing the immediate needs of his overwhelmingly rural constituents, such as improving agricultural harvests, might be at the top of his economic priorities list. But I was mistaken. The governor, and probably every other successful central, provincial, and local government official, is incentivized to contribute to the top priorities of the central government. And, like all of them, he was going to do his best to advance those central government goals. Their collective top priority is technology. This incident reinforced to me the impression that the Chinese government, from top to bottom, is engaged in a techno-utopian quest that is quite breathtaking in scope. China's unswerving and unquestioning commitment to advance technology to resolve virtually every problem is going to have profound consequences for China and the rest of the world. There is also very little discussion in China about the downsides, costs, or trade-offs. Let me please discuss the techno-utopian vision that I see is being advanced. First, it is helpful to recall that China's commitment to science and technology is not a new or recent phenomenon. Students of Chinese history will recall that over 100 years ago, the student protests of the May 4th movement called for a new culture based on science and democracy. Second, it is also interesting to note that China's current-day techno-utopianism is perfectly congruent with Marxism. I suspect that Marx would be strongly supportive of the materialistic and dialectic progress of ever-advancing technology toward an undefined utopian goal. Third, Lenin would be even more enthusiastic with the Communist Party using technologies, especially information technologies, to advance economic planning and to extend control of the party over society. Fourth, Confucianism is not hostile to technology in any way. Indeed, you see some of the same techno-utopian tendencies in other Confucian societies, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. Fifth, from a leadership perspective, President Xi's studied chemical engineering at Tsinghua from 1975 through 79, and his career shows a consistent interest in technology and science advance from the very beginning. Other officials around him have a similar background. Finally, the policies and planning of the Chinese government are framed very much in accordance with the CCP's revolutionary tradition. They proclaim that they wish to be at the vanguard of technology to correct the injustices of former imperialists. Techno-utopianism is deeply rooted in China's historic and ideological structures. It fits perfectly as a guiding principle for the CCP in the current era. Characteristics of Chinese innovation. American views of China have historically oscillated between overestimation and underestimation. we seldom get it right. Currently, some of our most jingoistic American compatriots underestimate China, believing that China is not innovative at all. This view is ill-founded. China has already moved from being an innovation sponge to an innovation leader. However, in the process they have redefined innovation in a manner that better fits Chinese needs. China's definition of innovation is different from Silicon Valley's. The McKinsey Global Institute helps us to understand the 4 drivers of Chinese innovation. First, China benefits from the sheer size of its consumer market, which helps companies to commercialize new ideas quickly and at scale. Chinese consumers are exacting. Many consumer-oriented companies that thrive in China will do well elsewhere. We should not be surprised at the success of TikTok or Temu. There are many more like them. Second, China has an ecosystem that is optimized for efficiency-driven innovation and manufacturing at scale. These manufacturers use lots of agile manufacturing, modular design, and flexible automation. Shein and Xiaomi are examples. Shenzhen is the world capital of fast prototyping. Third, do not underestimate China's capabilities at engineering-based innovation. They have millions of engineers and STEM workers. Huawei may be reviled in the US, however they have demonstrated some of the world's top engineering capabilities. Tencent, DJI, and BYD are other outstanding Shenzhen-based examples. Fourth, do not underestimate China's rapidly expanding capabilities at science-based innovation. In the most recent budget, R&D spending has been increased 10%, more than any other budget item. China has surpassed the EU in R&D spending. They may catch up to the US soon, unless we up our game. New productive forces. This innovative ecosystem is different from Silicon Valley. In some ways, it is synergistic with Silicon Valley, but that will not necessarily be the case in the future. So what exactly is the Chinese government doing from a policy perspective to create a technology lead over the US and the rest of the world? In China, this is being broadly discussed in terms that the Chinese call the new productive forces. There are 5 things about the new productive forces that are new to the mix and may distinguish Shenzhen from Silicon Valley. First, new productive forces implicitly recognizes that China is facing an acute labor shortage at the factory level. Second, they want to spur innovation and create new industries at almost any cost, in a manner that is not constrained by the market. They are willing to throw vast sums of capital and unlimited numbers of engineers into developing the products of the future. Third, there is an overwhelming mandate for self-reliance and import substitution. Fourth, there is plenty of government money. On the financing side, there is a huge sum of public money to support the new productive forces. Barry Norton of UCSD has calculated that about 11% of GDP is available over 5 years. Fifth, I think that we should all watch China's plans to turn data into the 5th factor of production, behind land, capital, labor, and entrepreneurship. In short, the new productive forces represent a doubling down of the Made in China 2025 type policies to be implemented with yet more attention, vigor, and more resources. Chinese domestic perspective. In my discussions with Chinese government officials, they believe that their policies are 100% correct, and that they are absolutely committed to their systematic implementation, regardless of the costs. In my opinion, the main victim of this drama are the Chinese people, especially those living in rural China, far away from the glitzy cities and dazzling companies. Stanford's very own Scott Rozelle has done a superb job at highlighting the profound challenges that non-elite Chinese face. It is doubtful that the new innovative forces will help them. Arguably, the new productive forces will lead to yet more inequality and wider rural-urban gap. Another group that can be considered collateral damage due to the government's excessive focus on technology is the Chinese private companies writ large. This is a group in a deep, deep funk, with their access to credit from the government banks is highly circumscribed. Internal markets are poor. They are worried about deflation. There is overcapacity everywhere, and they realize they cannot compete against state-owned enterprises. U.S. economic perspective. I think that Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, during her recent visit to China, was correct to highlight the international costs of overcapacity in the industries that China chooses to subsidize and support. We know that a combination of subsidies and other types of industry-specific incentives created overcapacity in steel, aluminium, solar panels, and wind turbines. This led to price destruction on a global basis. It is the only companies that receive the unwavering support of the Chinese government that survive this process. With industrial policies at the scale of China's, the trade policies of any WTO member are simply overwhelmed and become irrelevant. Industrial policy has eaten trade policy for lunch. So governments around the world which are concerned about their own competitiveness are reacting to China's policy orientation with measures that are ironically similar to China's. In the case of the United States, the IRA, Infrastructure Bill, and the CHIPS Act were largely passed to counter the Chinese challenge. U.S. national security perspective. It is important to note that China's fixation on technology has direct implications for the national security of the United States and its allies. This is brought into stark relief by China's unwavering support for Russia, especially in the context of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine and Russia's ongoing threat to all NATO member countries. China's partnership with Iran and North Korea are also concerns, as these countries are sometimes operating independently and sometimes in consultation or partnership with China and Russia. The concerns associated with technology transfer and joint technology development are even more acute given China's Foreign Intelligence Law of 2017 and the top leadership's commitment to civil-military fusion. In addition, China is expanding its production of nuclear weapons and their delivery systems many times over in a very short period. Given China's geopolitical ambitions as a rising power and America's commitment to the status quo and defending the international rules-based order, it is hard to see how these geopolitical constraints might be better managed. While conflict is not inevitable, tensions will need to be carefully managed as we nudge our way to a sustainable rules-based order. Short of conflict, there are many other countries that need to be managed. Let me say a few words about some of the most salient issues for American companies interested in China: export controls, the technology stack, data flows, R&D, and the most important and difficult issue, talent. US export controls have enormous effect and impact on American companies. Let me summarize. On the export control side, it is especially unfortunate for American companies when export controls are unilateral, enforced by the American government only on American companies. In such cases, and there are many, unilateral export controls asymmetrically hurt American firms and long-term American competitiveness. On the technology stack, as I hope I have demonstrated, the Chinese government is trying to force Chinese companies to eliminate foreign products, starting in government purchases and now moving to state-owned enterprises. The most recent iteration of this was that Micron and AMD chips were to be discouraged in government purchases of telecommunications equipment. The Chinese have cited no visible national security reason to do so. Unfortunately, we are seeing that American technology companies in China are coming under increasing pressure from the Chinese government and suppliers to the Chinese government. It is hard for me to see why this would stop. The Chinese government procurement actions are going to put Chinese SOEs in a very bad place. SOEs outside of China will probably use American products in their international subsidiaries, but they may not be able to do so in their home office. This will not contribute to smooth operations. It is unclear how the technology stacks in both China and the US will bifurcate and what the costs will be to market players in both countries. The unfortunate question is who will be hurt more. Data flows are another sensitive issue. China's Cyber Administration of China, CAC, has announced a bevy of controls that American companies are finding it very difficult to implement. The main problem is that the CAC wants to be able to regulate cross-border data flows that may involve important information. They decline to define the word important, but note that they would be pleased to make a judgment after you show it to them. The uncertainty over China's outbound data regulatory regime is causing anxiety for all multinational companies. We do not know how to invest in our IT structures. We do not know how to maintain connectivity between our China operations and our global operations. Frankly, we do not know when we will cross over an invisible line and be subject to Chinese penalties. The US government appears to wish to join the Chinese government in regulating outbound data flows, according to a recent executive order from the White House. This is also filled with uncertainty for American companies, who may have to seek Department of Justice advice on what had been routine data exchange. On R&D, I would note that a German CEO recently suggested that Germany and China set up an R&D Silk Road to enhance the mutual benefit of both German and Chinese companies. It is not only the Germans who benefit from joint R&D with China. Many American companies also do R&D in China to the benefit of their overall corporation. Much of the American corporate R&D in China is done to help to localize the international product, but more and more we are seeing that R&D coming out of American-owned facilities in China is impactful for their global operations. I expect that this will be yet more true in the future. And the big kahuna is talent. I would cite a US multinational company who found that one of their lead scientists in China was denied a visa for the United States. The scientist is the leading scientist in his field and was responsible for global R&D, including all efforts in a particular product line in the United States. This type of story is becoming more and more common. Let's be clear. American companies need access to Chinese talent if they are to remain globally competitive. If American companies are barred from hiring Chinese talent, then other companies will be given a long-term structural advantage that will, over time, impact American technological and scientific competitiveness. In conclusion, let me conclude by saying that the Shenzhen model of innovation and the Silicon Valley model of innovation are the envy of the world. It is probably true that Silicon Valley and Shenzhen, and indeed the US and China, have much more in common than we realize, but the differences are important. My own view is that the Silicon Valley model, which we might call libertarian, will win due to its acceptance of diversity and its inherently global nature. We have confidence in our own system. However, let's give the Shenzhen model the respect that it deserves. As a very strong competitor with large ambitions, the Shenzhen model has advantages over the Silicon Valley model. In an ideal world, companies associated with the Silicon Valley model and companies associated with the Shenzhen model would be able to integrate, competing and cooperating on a level playing field with well-known, well-enforced rules. But unfortunately, neither the level playing field nor the well-enforced rules exist. This is truly the greatest show on earth, and it will play out for the rest of our lifetimes. Here ends the direct quotes and today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a great Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.